See, this is what's key to me, and Tom, I want to hear you talk about this, because when Bernie, Senator, when you talk about this, there's a bad guy there. There's a villain in the story. There are people that are doing wrong by the American people. Donald Trump has a story where he's got villains as well, and they're different folks. Sometimes they're corporations, mostly they're immigrants and other people. Do you see the world that way, Tom? Is that the Democratic message? Do you think it's important, as the senator sitting next to you just said, to say the ruling class, his words, of this country, are basically screwing average folks?
Again, good question. Good question. Even Chris Hayes is looking at this situation and saying, there seems to be a big difference between you two. There seems to be a massive difference between you two. Classical liberal Democrat, there's a liberal, Chris Hayes. Neoliberal, Chris Hayes. Establishment candidate or establishment Democrat, Chris Hayes, MSNBC, is looking at these two and he's saying, yeah, there's a difference. There's a difference. Even he sees the difference. It is plainly apparent in listening to the things coming out of your mouth versus the things coming out of Sanders' mouth. There's a difference. I will wager you, Tom Perez does not answer that question at all. Tom Perez doesn't want to answer that question, just like he didn't want to answer the last two. I would be shocked as shit if Tom Perez answers this question. Let's take a look.
Well, listen, when we put hope on the ballot, Chris, we win. When we allow our opponents to put fear on the ballot, we don't do so well. I believe that an economy has to work for everyone to be...
Hillary Clinton, no, this is my point. Hillary Clinton ran on hope. She ran on hope. It was a very hopeful message. And the point is, do you have to name the enemy? That's my question. Do you have to say, these are the people that are screwing you?
Well, listen, I think you're creating a false choice, Chris. What we have to do as Democrats is to articulate very clearly that Donald Trump's vision for America is a vision for the top 1% of the 1%. It's a vision that's divisive. When he talks about the Make It in America executive order, if you turn over the sheet on that executive order, it probably says Made in China. You got 50 pallets or so of Ivanka's stuff that's come into the United States from China and Singapore since roughly the first of the year. So part of what we have to do is expose the fraud of Donald Trump. He keeps talking about how he's going to make your life better. He's going to bring jobs back to America. And then you look at what's happening in reality. He's making it harder for first-time home buyers to buy a home. He's still making all his products in Mexico, China, and elsewhere, or almost all his products. And so we talk about that, Chris. But then we also have to talk about our affirmative vision. I believe that America works best when everybody shares in that process.
Let me ask you this.
I love being right. I love being right. Call it a personality failing, whatever you want to call it. I love being right. Even Chris Hayes, MSNBC Chris Hayes, said, wait a minute, Tom. You're not answering my question. What I'm asking you is, and he reiterated it, in which case Tom Perez comes up and says, I think you're making a false choice. No, Tom, that's not a false choice. That's not a false choice. You're telling me about Donald Trump. That's not what he asked you. In fact, that is so far from what he asked you. It's almost completely unrelated. Completely unrelated. Sanders defined the problem. The man is a socialist. He full well understands socialist ideology in that sense. The bourgeois class, the ruling class, the Sanders said. He's making this point of, and understand me, yes, you can point to a villain if you want, that's fine. In some cases I do point to a villain. I do think there's an issue. But you must understand, a lot of the behaviors that these guys have at the top, this quote-unquote ruling class, these things are products of the model. Meaning all sorts of people would have the same experience, or at the very least will behave the same way, because the incentive structure of the model pushes them to behave that way. So yes, there is a villain. Yes, there are people who, even though they're in that space, could behave differently than what they behave. But let's be very clear that the problem is the model itself. Yes, those people are problematic, but the problem, the inherent core issue, the root cause, is the model that encourages that quote-unquote ruling class to behave in which it does to maintain its power and to accrue more power. The problem is the model. Now, that being said, when Sanders is making this case of the ruling class and everything else, he is right. He is right. Just because the model incentivizes certain behavior, that person is still taking that particular behavior. So it's, yes, I'm exporting this job overseas. Yes, the model tells you that you're going to be, in order to maximize profit, it's better for you to send somebody a job overseas and fire that American worker so you can pay this other guy less. But you're still doing it. You're still doing it. Part of the problem that you're going to have to fight against is that there's certain people who are advantaged by the way things are now. Now, those people are incentivized to keep things that way because they are advantaged by the way things are. When Sanders is making this argument of the ruling class, that's what he's talking about. You have a faction of people, small minority of people, who, because of the way things are arranged, they're trying to keep things that way, status quo forever. It enshrines our advantage, it enshrines our wealth and our influence. Well, you have to fight against that. You have to fight against that. That's what you have to tackle. That's what you have to identify. Because ultimately, you will never get to the issues associated with the model unless you get rid of the model protectors. Essentially, the people who are preventing you from actually addressing the issues with the model. Now, Sanders identifies that pretty clearly. He even goes so far as to say the ruling class. I'm waiting for him to say bourgeois. What's his name? Perez was like, yeah, you're giving me a false choice, man. You're giving me a false choice. I don't want to answer that question. We have donors. I can't say that. My donors will stop putting money in our pocket if I said something like that. You're putting me in a difficult position, Chris Hayes. Yeah. I'm going to answer another question that had nothing to do with the question that you just asked me because I am trying to protect our donors. I don't want to have that conversation. That's essentially what just took place right there. And Sanders is sitting here like a hostage. He has to be boiling inside. Because understand, the best thing, the only way out for that answer is to say, yes, I agree with Sanders on this front. Or, yes, there is a class. Even if you want to cut it down from the level of degrees in which you wanted to go as far as Sanders did by going with this ruling class thing, that would have been a better door to go through than, I'm just so not going to answer that question at all. Yeah, that's a horrible answer. Good question, Chris Hayes. Thank you for a little bit of pushback when he's trying to get out of it. But, yeah, that's a horrible answer. That's a horrible answer. And I would imagine Sanders sitting right there beside him is probably thinking to himself, goddamn, dude, you needed to answer that question better. You need to answer that question better. Chris Hayes was pointing out the disparity between you two. And he pulls in a question that hits directly on that disparity. Sanders is talking about a ruling class and that needs to be toppled if you're going to have fairness and a more equitable society. Are you going so far as to identify an enemy or identify the problem? Perez was like, yeah, man, that's a false choice. That's a false choice. I'm going to answer something else. Yeah, dude, you have to at the very least say, all of this unity tour is premised on this thing of, quote unquote, as you keep putting it, shared values. I've yet to hear anything shared in this process. I've seen you dodge question after question after question. And that specific question hit at the heart of the issue. It's at the crux of the issue. Sanders is saying one thing, and he's very clear on the thing that he's saying because of how clear it is. Your fuzziness, your ambiguity, the subjectivity of the words that you're saying it's like there's more of a lightning rod on it. There's more of an emphasis on the fact that there's such a difference because of how clear he is on his objectives. If you want people to honestly believe that there is some level of value share, this ain't the interview to do it. This is not the interview to do it.